To Stone by the Electric Light Orchestra. I think there was a film about certain Medusa when she looked at people they turned to stone. Not 100% sure. Anyway, as I mentioned previously, we do a lot of interviews and a lot of chats with different organisations, which particularly in Rockingham, and we're lucky enough to have Gai from an organisation called Scales. Actually. Might be a second, just get you. Yep. And so with Gai, can you please just give us an overview of what Scales is about?
Okay, so Scales is a community legal centre. It's based in Rockingham. Its catchment area is Kwinana and Rockingham, and we do outreach to Kwinana. Can I tell you a little bit about community legal centres?
Please do.
Community legal centres are around the world. Certainly there's over 200 in Australia. They're often built from the community who see a need for legal services for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to access them.
Yeah.
And they develop committees, they develop a volunteer service with pro bono lawyers and then seek funding. And that's how Scales was born. There was the Kwinana Evening Legal Service, managed by two volunteers, Geraldine Gilbert and Tom Joyce, and they were doing a weekly roster for lawyers and people to go and see, and then they were at the same time seeking funding. Murdoch University were looking for funding for a student law clinic as a practical opportunity for law students to get an idea about what it's like practicing. A collaboration was formed in 1996 and funding was sought for a model of having law students with the solicitors, and we opened in 1997 in April, and we continue to have the law clinic, but we also have a number of other services.
So that's, my maths is correct, that's like 26 years that Scales have been going, and the best thing is, to be honest, I went to a Salvation Army thing for homelessness last week, and I saw your organisation there, along with a lot of other organisations. And I think the sad thing, for not so much for me, is that the community don't know. Like Scales have been there 26 years, and I dare say if I go to somebody in the shopping centre, say, you heard of Scales, I go, no.
Yeah, and it's a dilemma for community legal centres, because me doing an article in the local paper is not necessarily our target audience who are sitting down with a cup of tea and reading the local paper. We work closely with a number of organisations who refer clients to us so that we're seeing those most in need. So we have criteria for people that we help. We have areas of law that we do and issues that we deal with, like family violence, family law, residential tenancy. We have a generalist legal practice, a human rights legal practice at Murdoch, and an Indigenous law clinic at Murdoch. So there are quite a number of services, and so we work closely. The court sends lots of people to us, legal aid, the Women's Refuge, the police, and then we participate in networks like the Homelessness Network, the Family Violence Network, the Age Friendly Network. I've sort of dropped off, but I'm hoping to get back to that shortly. So, and the Early Years Network. So there's different networks of community services who are dealing with people who are more vulnerable and more disadvantaged. So, yeah, it's a real dilemma that I've had over the years about, I'll do this story about Scales, and then we get people who can read, who probably have the resources to sit down and read a local paper and who could possibly access services in another way. So our services are targeted to people who would otherwise not be able to access legal services, which means they may not be eligible for legal aid, or they may not be able to pay a private lawyer, but often they don't know where to start. We don't train for legal disputes. The perception over the years that I see with people is what you see in America, where American lawyers in movies do all these weird break into houses and have a look at filing cabinets and things like that. Well, unethical stuff. So they're very frightened about engaging with a lawyer. They don't know where to start. And also they don't necessarily know that their issue is legal, and it might be something that we can help with and prevent it getting into court or getting someone evicted and things like that. So we try and do prevention, and we don't litigate in the way that a private practice would.
What would you mean by that?
So we would try and resolve a matter instead of taking it to court, okay? So we work very hard on negotiations, advocacy, those sort of things to try and resolve it, particularly our tenant advocates with the residential tenancy issues. They'll negotiate with the real estate agents, with the landlords, and try and, get a happy middle ground that people can resolve the issues without having to be involved in the court system.
How is the most difficult thing, for one of the most difficult things, getting people to come to you because A, they don't know you exist, and B, they don't know what you do. So if you say you represent this, do they go, I wonder, they probably can't help me. Did you get that sort of?
I'm sure there's people out there who think that, but often people will come to us as a first instant and they go, I've got this issue and I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And we've got Citizens Advice Bureau next door to us, and they have volunteers who are talking to people all day, every day as well. So it might be, okay, well, just give me a little bit of information. What's going on with you? You've got $2,000 in fines, and you might be going to have your car impounded or whatever, and you don't know what to do, or you've separated from your partner and there are children and you want to settle their children's arrangements. And we might go, well, that's something that we can help you with. I don't have any appointments at the moment, or we can book you in for such and such. With lawyers, there are very strong rules about what we're allowed to do and how we're allowed to do it. One of those things is conflict of interest. So a lawyer cannot work with a new client if it in any way disadvantages a previous or current client. The simple way to explain that is a wife and husband separate. We've had the wife for a consumer problem. We couldn't then necessarily see the husband because the wife's been a client and there's a potential dispute. But it's not that simple. It might be that we saw the wife for a motor vehicle accident or a tenancy matter 5 years ago. That still may become a conflict. We'd have to refer out. But when that arises, we're not actually allowed to tell them because of confidentiality. It's really weird. But if someone rings us and we're not able to assist them, bottom line is we will endeavour to give them some information about other services that they may be able to access. So that might be legal aid, it might be a neighbouring community legal centre, it might be a completely different non-legal service depending on what they need. But we try and hear their story to some extent, establish whether it's something that we can help with within our services and we have a number, or whether it's someone else. There are specialist community legal centres. So if you've got a dispute with an employer, we would refer you to Circle Green, who has an employment law practice. So they have specialist lawyers who deal with that all the time.
Wow. So it's like, from just my really, really brief chat, it's almost like, this is not meant in a bad way, by the way, Gai, it's almost meant, it seems like Pandora's box in that you open the lid and there's so many things.
Absolutely. And, I always say I liken it to that broken ankle in bed fall. These are human beings.
Yes.
Their issues are often complex and issues within their life that's impacting on their legal issue. Everyone's different. And sometimes people come to us with one issue and we look at it and we go, well, we've heard your story, we've given you advice on that, but actually we're a little bit concerned about this. This is something that you need to be considering. We have many women who come to us for issues such as fines, traffic, tenancy, where the underlying issue is family and domestic violence. So they're only dealing with what they need to deal with today to get by.
Yes.
But in the course of the conversation, we identify there are other issues that we might need to talk to them about.
Do you find that, and there's so many topics that hopefully in the coming weeks we can discuss and sort of get a more, like today's perhaps an overview, and as we go forward we can concentrate on this section or that section. Do you find that there is more of a call for your services just in general?
Yeah. Yeah, sadly there is. It'd be nice if we became redundant, but that's not the case. And I mean, some of that is, being able to have the resources to do community education to prevent or to intervene in a legal matter before it ends up in court or ends up in being problematic. I'd just like to say about community legal centres. So they're developed from the community. In Western Australia, we have 26 community legal centres that pretty well cover geographically the state. There are 3 kinds of community legal centres. There are generalist, which are usually geographically based, as I said, Scales, Rockingham, Kwinana. The Kimberley one does from Broome across to the Northern Territory border, about the size of Victoria is their catchment area for clients. Sometimes they have specialist services within their organisation. So we have tenancy, we have family law, we have family violence, and we have the Human Rights Clinic at Murdoch. So just because I say generalist, which is usually civil and family law. Then we have specialist legal services. So we have legal services that are based on the area of law, often civil law. So you have a consumer credit legal service that deal with disputes with banking institutions. They also do national consumer law. We have women, then we have welfare rights and advocacy service that deals with people who have a Centrelink dispute. And then the other specialist services is people who have specialist clients. So women's legal service deal with women on a broader area of law, whereas consumer credit legal service, it's a discrete area of law. It's a certain number of acts. So consumer protection law, and banking, the rules about banking, so that if someone's not happy, they can work that out. With the clients, there's a youth legal service, there's a women's legal service. Street law deals with people who are homeless, and they work from a number of different homeless centres, about 5 in the metro area. So there's a lot of different community legal centres that do different work. We're the same, but we're quite different. And if you want to find a community legal centre, you can have a look. We have a peak body, which is Community Legal WA, and that has a referral tool, an online referral tool. So you can go to their website, which is communitylegalwa.org.au. Okay. And there's Find a CLC, and you can click on that, and it'll say, well, if you've got an area. Have you got an area, a geographic area? Is there an issue? And you do these drop-down menus, and then and then from that, so it's chatbot stuff. So then from that, it will say, okay, well, you've got an employment problem. Circle Green's the main employment law. You've got an issue with disability discrimination. Sussex Street have a specialist practice in that. You're from Rockingham and you want advice on a motor vehicle accident, you can go to Scales or you can go to Legal Aid.
This is, I was actually sort of, when I say stole my thunder, but I was going to ask that. So if somebody comes into you with a problem, for you to identify that problem is obviously made a little bit easier by having a chat box sort of drop-down menu so they can go, yep, that's affected me, therefore it goes to there there.
Well, that's for people in their own home to be able to look for that. We don't have that in the office as such, but that's our WA Peak has developed that. So every community legal centre updates their information about what they do and who they do it for. Yeah. And they can do that. If they come into our office, we'll just have that conversation with them and just sort of establish it. We've got experienced staff who can unpick a little bit of the issues, and then we can look at how we can help them.
So in your organisation, Gai, is there, do you have a large volunteer base or not large? Or?
We don't, because we host the student clinic from Murdoch University. So we have an agreement with Murdoch, and we'll take up to 60 students a year. So that's for a semester. They come for a semester 1 day a week. And they work in the legal practice under the supervision of our experienced solicitors.
Oh, wow.
So that sort of dilutes our ability to have lots of volunteers. Other community legal centres, like I said, Consumer Credit Legal Service, Mental Health Law Centre, have a lot of volunteers, often law students who will be trained up. So they'll be recruited, they have recruitment rounds, they're trained up, they do induction, and then they might work on their phone line. So if you rang Consumer Credit Legal Service, it's quite likely that you would be speaking to a volunteer who's rostered on, they've had some training, they've got access to information, and they've got a solicitor supervising that phone line. So Circle Green have tenancy, humanitarian group, which is recently arrived migrants, and employment law. So the tenancy one is staffed by staff with the phone line, but others do volunteers. So we have volunteers who are on our management committee. We have student placements. We've got a social work student placement at the moment. We've got 2 graduate placements, so they have to do about 20, 25 days in a legal practice as part of their work experience for their graduate studies. And we have a couple of students who've done this law clinic and want to stay and do more work. So it quite varies how we source volunteers and what we do with them.
It's very interesting. So you have, like you say, people come to you and some of them stay on as well, I assume.
Look, what's very exciting at the moment is that so the students are usually at the end of their law degree when they come and do scales. Yep. And the goal of that is for them to have that opportunity. Teachers prac placements, doctors have prac placements. It's similar to that. So a day in the life of our clinic is that we will have appointments in the morning for new clients. So it's week number 2 or 3 of this semester, so they would probably buddy up. So you'd have 2 students go in and interview a client, and we'd have a couple of clients in the morning. And then they'd check with the supervisor that they've got the information that they need, and then we'll make an appointment for next week for them to come back, and that gives the students time to do the research, prepare the advice, because they're doing it from scratch. The students, over the course of the semester, develop the knowledge and skills to be able to interview one-on-one. They develop the understanding of what instructions they need to take, how to manage a file, how to brief a senior solicitor. So even if they don't go into legal assistance services, any degree, and let's face it, any job, you need to know how to manage a file, you need to know how to use a photocopier, you need to know, what you need to keep and what you don't need to keep and those sort of things. So
sorry, go on.
No, sorry. You'll be shocked to hear I sidetracked myself.
No.
At the moment, we have 2, 3, 4, 5 people working at Scales who did this law clinic unit, and have gone out into the big wide world and have come back to the community legal sector. And when I go to community legal centre gatherings in Western Australia, on average I see about 5 people who did Scales and have gone into the legal assistance sector. So legal assistance is legal aid, Aboriginal legal services, community legal centres, and family violence legal prevention legal services. So it's very exciting to see that some are going there anyway, but others that we inspire them to work in access to justice issues. The clients that we take on and do more work for are people who wouldn't be able to access possibly legal aid or a private solicitor, or they might need that initial advice to then know that legal aid is an option. So we give legal advice and we give referrals.
This is as I said to you before, this is like Pandora's box, and there's so much that we can go into, obviously.
Oh, and I could talk for the country about my work in my centre.
Look, that's, whatever we do, whether it's being people here at IPL Radio or yourself, if you're passionate about it, you're passionate about it. And I think there's nothing better than I'm speaking to you here and you're passionate about what you do. It's not like coming, I'll work for you and this. And I don't want to,
well, all our staff are very passionate. To work in the community sector, it's hard. Our clients have complex issues. They're experiencing trauma. They've been victims of crime. They've, things have happened. It's not necessarily that they create the situation that they find themselves in, so it's not like, they got themselves into that. People become homeless because they lose their job.
Yeah.
They get sick and can't stay at work. That, the landlord says, I need to move back into my house, or my kids need to move into the house, or we're going to put the rent up $200 a week. There's a housing squeeze at the moment. So there's lots of reasons that someone might become homeless or might need to get legal advice. We target, but it's not exclusive, but we prioritise young people and older people. Women, we get quite a lot of money for family violence with women. We prioritise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, culturally and linguistically diverse. So we have a number of groups of clients that we identify, and our funders identify as well. So we're meeting requirements with our funding. So there's so much. So we have priority groups of clients and we have priority issues. If you looked at it as a percentage, 80% of our work is family and domestic violence, separating families with children, and tenants in matters with homelessness. The other 20% is consumer matters, fines enforcement, traffic matters, because legal aid don't give advice on traffic matters anymore. That's something that they drew back from. So community legal centres have picked that up. And
it's, if you look at, is there, it's not a nice thing to say, but it's a question. You mentioned domestic violence,
yep.
Which, when I don't know about yourself, Gai, obviously, but I just find it abhorrent, in my whatever my father always said, you no matter what, you never hit a woman, basically. Yeah. And therefore I find that side of society really difficult to understand.
It is very difficult to understand, and it's very difficult to resonate because, of course, the common response is, why doesn't she leave? Whereas, in the sector and the family violence field, it's like, well, why doesn't he stop hitting her?
Yeah.
And there are people who say it shouldn't be gendered, but the fact of the matter is that over 90% of victims are women. Many of the men who are victims in a same-sex relationship. So there is a reason for the gender bias in family violence because women are the victims. And we have specialist funding for women in family violence situations, which is very exciting because we've been saying, I've been in the sector 26 years, we've been saying to government, it's not just legal advice. These people come to us, they've got all sorts of issues. And we got funded in 2008 with national money for a lawyer who does family law, family violence, and whatever else walks in the door with the client, a client advocate who can do that intake. So she's a qualified social worker and she does that first conversation stuff. We do a risk assessment to see what their risk is and what needs, so that prioritises what help they need. And some people don't know their risk because they've never heard about family violence. We have a counsellor so these are in-house referrals. We don't do counselling externally. These are for our clients themselves. So we have a counsellor who'll work with a woman through their legal process with us. So if they have to go to court, that's going to be stressful. So, the counsellor will work them through some exercises to try and help them calm themselves, talk about strategies about if you have to go to court, we'll meet you here, we'll sit with you here, you can wait in the family violence service until your time's up so that you're not in the same room as your perpetrator. And we have a financial counsellor and she also works within the broader practice as well as the family violence practice. So she does money education. So there's debt negotiation, but there's also often women who've experienced family violence have either end of the scale. They've either not been allowed to have any involvement in the money, they're completely ignorant about how to do it, so need to get a bit of training, or they've been responsible for everything, all the debts in their name.
Oh my goodness.
And they need to review that and work out what they do and how they do that. So, and we've got an admin support too. So that team, and we have 3 solicitors working in there part-time now. That team do some remarkable work, and we work closely with the Lucy Source Centre, the Women's Refuge, the Family Violence Service at the court. The court staff refer people to us all the time, as do police. So there's family violence is a terrible thing. People don't know how to respond, and maybe that's someone that you could have in is talk to Anne at Lucy Saw about what do you do when you can hear the neighbours fighting and you're a bit worried about them? What do you do when the girl upstairs, has got a black eye? You don't want to cause any trouble. You don't want to escalate any abuse that's happening, and you're not really sure what to do. Is calling the police the right thing to do for the safety of that woman? That's a very good point. And often when women come to us when they're experiencing family violence, they've been told by someone, go and get a family violence restraining order, and that's the panacea. But what we do when we first see a client is we assess whether a restraining order will make her safer or will make her less safe. Yeah. So there's a lot of consideration about how we do intake and what we do, and we get to know them. But it's wonderful to have the multidisciplinary different positions in the organisation that we can work with a woman, so she's not having to go to 6 different places to get this. It's marvellous. I'm very excited about it. It's
I mentioned when I went to the Salvos last week, you go there and you get that much out of it, me as a presenter, and even today, the amount of different avenues that you have, Gai, and you just bring up simple questions about, like if a woman's in a domestic violence, what does she do? Or if you live next door to them, what you should do. And it's really hard because as a member of the community, where do you step in? If I go see something which I think's wrong, you've hit the nail on the head. I think, well, what should I do? And I think that's very important. Just a small thing that I've learned today, should we do? Yeah.
Lawyers say it depends all the time when you ask a question, and it does depend. But there are places, there's the domestic violence helpline, so there's places that you could call and say, I'm not really sure what to do. Yeah. And if you know the person, you might be able to have a quiet conversation with them, and you might be able to say, look, if you need me to call the police, just text me, the kid's name, or I've remembered the name of that TV show, it's I Spy or whatever. Just a sort of a safe word that you can let people know.
Ah, yes.
That, so you're not saying, excuse me, perpetrator of family violence, can you just step back a minute while I call someone to get some help? But it may be that if you set those strategies up, those safety plans up, and that's what we work with them. So we do similar work to the Women's Refuges, doing the intake and case management. So we try and provide an integrated service where needed. Not all of our clients need that. Some do, though, and they come at different stages. In our broader practice, which is the student law clinic, the family law clinic, the vulnerable women service that we have, which is another lot of federal money that we've got, and the tenancy service, family violence may have been an issue but wouldn't be the primary thing that they're coming to scales for. But, it's like 70%, 80% of our clients, family violence has been an issue. So that may be that they've been accused of it, or they've experienced it, and they may have experienced it in the past. It may be that they've got a tenancy dispute because a door got kicked in and the landlord's not happy with it and telling them to move on, and we try and help them negotiate. What we're doing what we've identified within our organisation is that we've got tenant advocates, we've got senior solicitors, we've got who have a broad practice. We have social workers and counsellors. So we have quite a number of people who we're hoping will rotate through on a weekly basis to come and talk about their specific area. Yeah. And there are things like the financial counsellor can talk about where you can go to find resources and those sort of things. So there's a national debt helpline, which is, it's a very easy number to remember, so I'm going to tell you. It's 1-800 007 007. So just remember James Bond. And financial counsellors are trained. They have a diploma through TAFE. They work in not-for-profit organisations and they're free services. So they're not financial advisors who you go to work out what to do with your super. They are people trained to work with people about managing their money better. Okay, so I can go and see a financial counsellor even though I'm fully employed, or someone who's unemployed could go and see a financial counsellor. And they're superheroes. They negotiate debt. They identify that someone's been, that a loan's been inappropriate and it shouldn't have never happened, and they can get debts waived and things like that. There's so many things that social workers and financial counsellors can do that's beyond the legal. It's a bit of a culture shock for us, working in a legal environment and then having non-legal professionals come in. We've got to, there's a little bit of, okay, how are we going to do this? Because social workers do it this way and lawyers do it their own way. And so we've had to work on that over the years with different things. But
with, again, being around a little while, one of the things, as I've noticed, is a general question here, is that things change so quickly. Like what is acceptable today, tomorrow is unacceptable, which is just the way it all pans out. So how does your organisation, with things changing so quickly, how hard is it for you to adapt to those new rules or things that come in?
Well, we have a lot of systems in place.
Okay.
We're lucky through our state and national association, community legal centres and legal assistance sectors, the broader legal aids and that. Community legal centres have an accreditation process. So there's a minimum standard of quality of documents and all that we have to do, and we get accredited. We're in stage 3 of an accreditation process that I've got a report due in a minute. So we're providing the accreditor with proof that we have a risk management register, that we've got insurances, that we've got policies and procedures that the staff know about. Within the legal practice, we also have support through those state and federal peaks for what we call a risk management guide. So it's a document that's been developed that says when you're seeing a client, so you've got rules, you've got your legislation for lawyers as well, but this is beyond that. This is for us to be able to have a richer benchmarked practice. So the legal practice guide says this is the information that you need to keep for your client. You need to keep it this amount of years, and you need to record your advice, and you need to do that. So through the systems that we have in place, and absolutely, look, I spent COVID working on a new policy and procedure manual, and that 3 months when we had lockdown, the first thing I had to do was do a disaster plan, which I'd never had before. I'd done a risk assessment. And so things change constantly, having worked in the community sector. But often if there's law changes, there's education around those law changes, and that's what lawyers do, is read legislation. Not a sport that I'd like to live with. But, there's different services provide training. So Circle Green, it's a recently merged 3 community legal centres into one. Circle Green has a tenancy practice. They also resource the local community legal centres that have a tenant advocate funded in their service. And so they provide fact sheets for the general public, training for community workers, training for tenant advocates. So if there's a change in the law, so recently there's been a change in the law so that if someone's affected by family violence and they need to break their lease, so, I'll just go with your regulars, husband and wife renting a house, both names on the lease, there's been family violence, the wife has left or the husband has left, there's potential, if you don't do anything, and you couldn't really do it before if you don't agree, you're both liable for any costs that happen. So if there's damage done to the property, that's something that both will be liable for. there's been a change in the law where if someone's affected by family violence, there are certain people who can sign off on a document that says you need to break the lease within 7 days. So you can very quickly get out of a liability that potentially could go on for a year or so if you've got a long lease and you can't get out. Although these days it's pretty easy to get out of a lease because there's so many people looking for housing. But so there's been training through legal aid, through the departments and through specialist community legal centres, Women's Legal Service. So they all provide information on those things. So we, through our networks, we gain information through our peaks, through our professional organisations. So there's lots of ways that we can go. There's a lot to do.
Well,
it's never dull at my house, I'll tell you.
I was just going to say, I was going to ask a general question, but and I will ask a general question. I mean, obviously, the scope of your work is enormous. I mean, you know, you might mention that you've got people look after this, you've got people look after that, and those people, that's their little area, but you oversee all of it.
Yeah.
How do you do that, Kay?
Well, I don't run the legal practice. We have a principal solicitor who does that.
Okay.
So we have two quite senior solicitors, senior as in long-standing working, not as in old, who have a very broad practice.
Yeah.
Okay. And the principal solicitor oversees that and makes sure that everyone's doing what they're doing. I oversee the organisation. I answer to the management committee. We're a not-for-profit. So I oversee the organisation. So it's policies and procedures, people management, stakeholder engagement, relationships, reporting, compliance. It's great. And I also get the complex issues when the girls who are answering the phone struggle with what might be the best way. So I'll have a chat to people about that too. I also like to go out to the homelessness event and the spring fairs and chat to people too. So that's great fun. I love getting out and catching up with people. But we can't do everything for everyone. We have what we do, the services that we provide include information and referrals. So an information might be a fact sheet. It might be go to the Legal Aid website and have a look. Legal Aid practice in these areas of law, but provide information in a much broader range of law, including what to know about if you're going to engage a private lawyer. So there's lots of things that they do. So we do information, referrals, so they might be just some numbers, or it might be that we'll ring another service and say, is this an appropriate referral? I've got Bill Smith on the phone and they need advice about this. Is that what you do? Are you able to help? Do you have capacity? Yep. So that often depends on the vulnerability. It's a little bit arbitrary because sometimes it may be time, whether they've got time to do that. We do advice and advocacy. So advocacy wouldn't necessarily be going to court. That would be more like the tenant advocate negotiating with the landlord to try and, bring down the log of claims for each side so we can work out what we can agree to. And the family lawyer prepares documents for court, helps people with forms. Representation, so different staff might go to the Rockingham Magistrates Court for restraining orders. The tenant advocates are able to appear before the clerk of courts and the magistrate on tenancy matters. Our human rights practice might go to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. So there's lots of different ways that we might represent. We also, and we've post-COVID, we're getting back into it, doing community legal education and law and policy reform. So when you have the same issue come through the door 5, 10, 50 times, you're like, there's something not working in the system.
True. So
law and policy reform is a core part of what we should be doing as community legal centres, and other organisations do it too. So community education might be to a group, or it might be like I'll go out to, for example, Kwinana Early Years Service, and we're planning on going out and talking to the staff at their staff meeting about what we do. And from that, we might garner that they might want some education on family violence or family law. What's advice, what's information, because that's really important too.
Yeah.
So we might do that. and law and policy reform might be that you identify an issue that's coming through the door. And we might talk to other community legal centres who do similar work and see if across the board it's an issue. It might be that there's a new law that comes in or a new policy that comes in and it's not working properly and it's causing problems in a way it wasn't intended. So, I mean, you know, the current thing is the Duke and Gorge thing. The legislation about the Aboriginal Heritage Act, which was in for 5 weeks and has been to be
withdrawn
because it didn't work the way they intended. That would be very unusual that legislation is withdrawn. But it might be that in Centrelink changing a policy that there are people who fall through the gaps.
Yes.
So we need to go, hang on a minute, that shouldn't apply to Austudy clients or something like that.
Yeah.
So and the move towards being online. You know, not everyone's got a computer. I've got a mobile phone. I've got a computer at work. I don't have a computer at home that I use because I don't. I use my phone.
Yeah.
It's not easy to do some of these things on your phone.
Exactly right.
So Department of Justice have recently updated the e-courts portal, and essentially if you want to do any business with a court, you have to do it online. That's not – we're not all
look, I think that's
so it's, you know, and it's about learning how it goes. We had another thing that's come in the last couple of years is for many years when you had court fines, when people had court fines, sometimes what they would do is they would sort of accrue them and then say, oh, I'm just going to work them off in prison and be in prison for a few days
I remember that, yeah.
But the problem was that people were dying in prison and it's actually not appropriate to imprison someone for that sort of stuff. I mean, you know, justice issues and all that, human rights stuff. So they stopped it. And what they've done instead of that is a work and development permit scheme where organisations can register to be a service that provides services. So you've got some fines, you know, you've got $1,000 in fines that you just can't afford to pay off. You might go to a financial counsellor and say, hey, I've got some fines. Are you part of the work and development permit scheme?
Yeah.
And you've got to register before the service has got to register before they provide the service. And you have an appointment with a financial counsellor for an hour. There's a dollar value on health, on counselling. So I think it's $70. So you could work $70 off your fine by going to a financial counsellor.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so people have an opportunity through different services to do that. And you can have a look on the Department of Justice website about that stuff. Leanne might talk a bit more about that when she comes our financial counsellor. But, yeah, there's lots, you know, and that was a human rights issue. You don't put people in prison for that, and people were dying.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's as I say, it's interesting.
It's been really interesting chatting to you, Gai. I would like, and maybe off air we can talk about this, about getting some people for your organisation, if you're happy, of course, to get them and we can drill down to more.
We've already developed a roster. We're ready, Nick. We're ready to go.
Well, look, I think it's great. Look, again, I can't. What's the word? I can't emphasise enough that you just mentioned then just one thing, and I thought I wouldn't even know that. My understanding was you didn't pay your fines and people would go to prison. That was my understanding. Now, you've said, in fact, there's other ways you can do that. Now,
well, you can't go to prison now and work them off, but, yeah, there are alternatives to paying the money if you don't have the money.
And the thing with that, Gai, is my theory is sometimes if I don't know those things, out of 100 people, probably 90% of people don't know.
Absolutely.
And we have to get that message out there. So when we drill down on all these different topics that we can, there'll be a lot more information out which will help everybody.
Yes, and while it's not possible for us to give specific legal advice on air, so it'll be information that people be providing, but I understand that you're going to invite people to ask questions and we'll see what we can do about
we do.
those. So, you know, we'll have different people coming in each week.
That's great. All righty. Well,
Yeah.
thanks again. And just one more thing. If I always say this, if people need to contact Scales, could I have an email address?
Yep.
And if you do have a phone number, if you could just say that on air so that people can do that, please, Gai.
Yep. So our main line number is 95500400. And our email address is scales, SCALES, @murdoch.edu.au.
Thanks very much, Gai. It's been great. And so you've opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I look forward every week or every 2 weeks, whatever the case may be, and get people in here to talk about the specific things. But thanks again.
And if people have got a group that they'd like someone to come out and talk about specific issues, it might not be us who have the legal knowledge, but we might be able to get a specialist service to come down and talk about it. So I'm more than happy to talk to people if they'd like a presentation.
Thanks very much again, Gai. Thank you.